Thank you and welcome back to LudoNarraCon 2023. My name is Nathan Black, he, him, and I am the Operations Manager for Finji. I'm joined today by Andrew Shouldice and Lindsay Ishihiro. And if you could introduce yourself, Andrew?
Sure, yeah. Like Nathan said, my name is Andrew Shouldice, and I was the primary developer on Tunic. He, him.
And Lindsay?
And I'm Lindsay Ishihiro. I was the writer and a little bit of narrative design and a little bit of creature design and a little bit of community development for I Was a Teenage Exocolonist, and I go by none-they pronouns.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about just narrative design in games and how two very different games approached narrative and how they showed the core of the game to the player. And yeah, so Andrew, what was your narrative approach to Tunic?
Narrative approach to Tunic. I'm gonna take that question and use it as a jumping off point to gush a little bit about how cool Exocolonist is, because it's extremely cool and I like it a lot. I've been playing it for the past few days, and one of the things that I like so much about it is a big contrast to how the narrative development for Tunic happened, and that is that I am always so impressed when a story is told honestly and openly with a huge pile of words, because the narrative development for Tunic was very much about kind of hiding behind ambiguity, right? Like being not necessarily able to commit to a particular story and keeping things as this sort of vague tone poemy sort of why don't you choose your own story sort of feeling, not in a option A, option B, but in a open to interpretation sort of way. So there's very little written work in Tunic. For those who are not familiar, it's mostly written in this sort of strange glyph-like language, and it's primarily sort of an action-adventure game with a bunch of secrets and things. And every time you do come across any amount of writing, it's probably going to be in text that you can't read. So from the storytelling perspective, the visual beats of sort of establishing why you're in this world, what's happening, what is the sort of like larger structure of what's going on in the world is told very, very lightly. And so I admire Exocolonist for just like telling a story, you know, and I love that I guess vulnerability is a thing that I see in that sort of thing. I don't know. I will now pass things off to Lindsay.
Oh my gosh, you said such nice things about Exocolonist. Thank you so much. I know you're deep in the muck of playing through it right now, and so there's a lot of feelings, and I'm so sorry for what I'm about to put you through. There's a lot that's going to happen to you in the next 10 hours of gameplay.
You have already done terrible things to me, like from the jump. And it's upfront about it, which is another cool thing. Like the way that, we can talk about it later, but the way that you've handled content warnings and stuff is really cool.
Thank you. The narrative approach to Exocolonist is, there are similarities and there's differences. Obviously, there's a lot more words. Exocolonist has 600,000 words of just the narrative, which, as I like to kind of tell people as for comparison, is that it's more words than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit combined. Yeah, so I wrote a lot, and I wrote it basically from a month before quarantine, and I wrote it until like September 2021. So that was a really strange year and a half that I was writing Exocolonist, and during that same time I was also homeschooling my daughter through grade 2 in French immersion, and writing this story, and so it was a little pressure cooker of what can I throw in this game? Really, the sky's the limit, because there's not a lot else going on right now, and also it's a very strange time in my life and in everyone else's life as well. So the approach to Exocolonist was really just like being able to put a lot of myself in the story and what I was going through at the time and what a lot of people were going through at the time. It was a very strange time for society, and it sort of like made a lot of people question a lot of things that they held quite sacred about society and what they expected other people would do and what they expected of themselves. Like, so many people I know came out of quarantine with a brand new gender. That was the thing that happened. So writing Exocolonist was something that was very uniquely this time of introspection and social change and social unrest and a lot of like concern for the future and where we were headed and how we could possibly overcome what seemed like these huge, both structural and interpersonal conflicts that were cropping up and becoming really, really mainstream and really obvious. And so that was a lot of what went into Exocolonist, and I really found once I started writing, I couldn't stop, which was something that was a bit of a pain point in the beginning because it was originally intended to be short, snappy, a playthrough, maybe 3 or 4 hours long, get a life done, try again, a lot more roguelike. And then I got on, and, I come from a fandom background, who, what do you do? What did you do this weekend? Well, I wrote 20,000 words about my favorite fictional characters kissing. What did you do on the weekend? Kind of thing. So bringing that energy to Exocolonist and just being like, what problems can I write myself into the corners of these worlds meant that I ended up writing a lot. And there were many points through development where it was like, this is great, can you write maybe a little bit less? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I kept writing. But ultimately what it created was something I'm very proud of, because thank you for noticing that it is a very vulnerable piece. When it released, I was worried because there was so much of me in it and so much of my hopes and fears and sort of my opinions on how we could be better as a species, and I just hoped it would land well, and that it has, and that people have kind of seen that in the game has been really gratifying. So yeah, that was the narrative approach to Exocolonist, was really just like writing myself into all of these corners and sort of discovering the story as we went along.
Lindsay, I see you interacting on our Discord a lot with the fans. Do you feel like the fans as a whole have seen every corner and every part of Exo that you've written?
I think so. I have nothing but respect and faith in my people to like get in, and like there are a couple fans who I've actually reached out to and been like, you nailed it. Your interpretation of these like very scant little clues that I hid about the world and what I had hoped that you would hook onto and be like, oh, the relationship between these two people is maybe more fraught than I thought it was. They've plucked it out and they've written a fanfic about it. And like I haven't read it because that would be strange of me to like comment on literally what they've written, but it's very much like you got the dynamic, it was there. So even more so than just like making sure they've read every story, a lot of them have really nailed just what I'd hoped. And like I said, coming from a fandom background, when I was writing, I very on purpose was all like, I'm gonna hint that something is here, and someone who is like me is gonna see that, and they're gonna be like, oh, there's something going on there, I'm gonna write a story about it. So I littered quite a few of those, hoping that people like me would see them, and people did, and it was very exciting.
And also by contrast, Andrew, I know you're on our Discord, but you're very quiet. Do you feel, and also Tunic is a game about secrets in a lot of ways. Do you feel like the fans have found everything you have for them, or is that something we can't say yet?
Well, I mean, let's say they haven't, right? Then I would, be able to answer that by saying, no, there's still more there. But if they had, and I said, no, the fun is over, everybody go home, that's no fun at all. But I will say people have been very thorough, and there are lots and lots of secrets hidden in the game. Something sort of, Lindsay, you said something about sort of obliquely referencing something, and it's a real, like, if you know sort of situation. Like if it connects with someone in particular, they will understand what you're putting in there. And I like that a lot, because I feel like that is the caliber of secrets that are left after everything has been sort of, strip mined out of it are the things where it's less about content and more about intention. And I think if there's anything left in Tunic, that's the sort of thing that's there.
The real secrets are the fanfic we wrote along the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
I should check to see if Archive of Our Own has any Tunic stuff. I have not looked.
Oh, maybe. They exist in very different spheres of like nerdery. Like there's the nerds that love secrets and love to know everything, and then there's the nerds that are like, I need to know a little bit, and then I'm gonna go. And like the latter definitely are the group that writes the most fanfic.
Right. Yeah.
So.
I guess to answer the question then about being somewhat more quiet on the Discord, I am quiet on the Discord for the same reason that the game has very few words compared to 600,000 words. Is that I'm the sort of person that's going to maybe type something and then backspace it out and think, nah, but best to not.
There's a lot to be said for the experiential nature of games, and I think between Exo and Tunic we have like two ends of the spread that end up actually in this case being really similar. Like in a game about discovery like Tunic, there's so much that it's I found this secret as opposed to the fox found this secret. And in Exo, there's I explored these paths, but it's through the avatar of your player. Do you all want to speak on that a little bit? I feel like there's a lot of like Exo is a very broad story that you can pick your way through in so many different ways. And Tunic is very much a broad story that you get to explore in your own ways, or maybe a more focused story that you explore in your own ways.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when you start the game and it's like, there's your guy, there's your little scrunkly, there's your guy, there's a sense of like, well, that is me. For example, say Dragon Age or Mass Effect, it's your Inquisitor, it's your Shepherd. And sometimes people play it like it is their player avatar, and sometimes people play it like it is the person living in the world who has their own unique opinions that may or may not match with your own because you want to experience the story from that angle. And there's the blank slate design where it's like, I'm just going to be myself in this world. And some people play Exocolonists like that. I watch streamers a lot. My husband watches the most streamers, and then he'll tag me in if someone's particularly into the game. So I watch some streamers, and it's interesting seeing the divide of people who play. The generic name for the main character in Exocolonist is Soul. So people who play Soul as if they were themselves walking through the world versus probably an equally as large camp of people who have a particular soul in mind that they're playing. And often this kind of happens through gameplay iterations as well, where you'll play the first one how you would play it, and then you'll be like, well, now I'm going to play an asshole soul. And that's going to be a completely different experience. And so there is kind of this sense that Soul is a character who is not you, and it gives a very particular sense of it's different. It's not your own player agency, but it's almost like a story agency. It's like you get to choose how you go through this world and how that affects the world. One of the differences between, like you mentioned, Tunic has a story that you experience, and there's branches you can, you have a good end and a bad end. And this story that you get to uncover and try to figure out what it means. Whereas like Exocolonist, it's not a fork at the end. It's like a fork right at the beginning, and you can just basically choose what the story is. And so that's kind of supported by, or it kind of like shows off the ways different people play the games. Do you want to find the one story I left you? Even though there's not one story, it's sort of like a, what do you think the story is, which is, I love that kind of thing as well, and there's elements of that in Exocolonist, versus like, I've given you 600,000 words, please find your own story somewhere in here.
It's almost like, I mean, my soul, for instance, started as a blank. You know, instead of, like you said, with Mass Effect, where you're sort of deciding like, this is me and this is what my person is going to look like, and they're going to be like me, the fully formed human. At least my experience was, my soul was nothing. And the experience of playing the game, of growing up, you know, experiencing a childhood, allowed that character to grow and become someone different. And I am getting to witness that as I'm playing, which is something that I haven't experienced before. It's usually like, I've decided that I'm going to be, you know, the good guy or the mean guy, and I'm going to play through the game with that particular way. But no, I'm witnessing a character change. You know, my soul started out one way, but has become quite a different person at the age of 15 or 16, or however old I am now. And that's fascinating and cool. And that, in contrast with Tunic, I think that that layer between player and player character was intentionally kept as paper thin as possible. And the hope is that it gets thinner and thinner as the game goes on, as you play it, where you start out thinking, that's my little guy. I wonder what its story is, you know? And gradually realizing, no, that's me. This is a cipher through which I am experiencing the world. That is my avatar, and really nothing more, aside from maybe a little idiot who looks at treasure chests more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think in some ways that's expressed really well through the manual, which is in some ways breaking the fourth wall, implying that what you do in the game affects what you can see as a player and what you can do as a player.
Are we okay to get into spoiler stuff? Because I haven't finished a full loop yet, but I know that there's looping going on, as you mentioned, Lindsay, which is also like a sort of a fourth wall sort of metatextual sort of thing. Sort of like, I guess that it actually exists as part of the fiction in Exo. And that's cool. I guess that was the thing that I hadn't considered when we were starting to work on this panel, is that they both have that sort of like, hey, wait a second. Here's some sort of grand cosmic loop happening.
We're free to spoiler.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoiler Andrew specifically, because like I said, he has a world of hurt coming up towards him in the next 10 hours of gameplay.
I mean spoiling everybody else. I'm only plugging my ears.
Okay, you can deafen. There you go.
But yeah, I think, Lindsay, you might have mentioned it before, that there's this idea of like some grand cosmic loop of some kind, but also that you start with a certain amount of naivete about the world, and slowly realize like, oh no, things are a lot darker than I realized, and then have maybe this little spark of hope that maybe you can do something about it, whether or not you actually can in the end. I don't know if you had more thoughts on that specifically.
I can talk to the way the narrative design supports being a child is interesting. A lot of people, most of the stuff that I work on, a lot of my content revolves around themes of motherhood and family and family roles and things like that. And like I said, I was homeschooling my daughter while I was writing Exocolonist, and you can see elements of that in some of the games. Some of the job paths. The tutoring event, for example, is just one for one. It's my experiences in homeschooling during a very difficult time in everyone's lives. So you can really see that, and it was sort of a happy accident that the life simulation aspect of Exocolonist, and that specific narrative design element of, month by month you plot along and you build your character. It was growing up. It was childhood. And in the doing so, it made these child characters seem very real. And that was something that I particularly loved working on in Exocolonist, was these people that you meet feel real. They feel like people that you have known since you were literally babies, and you know no other children except for, these 10 people within 2 years of you. There are other children, but like these are your creche kin. And so the sense of like very intensely bonding with these people and being interested in how they change and being betrayed by the choices that they make, or feeling hurt and feeling disappointed in your friends or falling in love with them, it felt real. And so that was where a lot of the words came from, because I was writing these characters, and it's like, what if you love this person? What if you had a falling out with this person? What if this person did something to hurt you? Or what if you did something to hurt them? And a lot of the branching element of the game comes into all of these like player choices, where it's like, what if you said this? And while I was writing it, there's 800 discrete events in Exocolonist that you can pull, depending on what you do. There's profession events, there's exploration events, there's key events that you hit every year in every playthrough and stuff like that. And I'd be writing event 600, and I'd realize that I had given a character an option that I would have had to account for in some other event, where it's like, oh, you said that you liked someone in this event, but in another one, the only option you had was to like blush and stammer when they flirted with you. But it's like, what if you had already flirted with them before? And so I had to like constantly go back and like check myself and make sure that every possible thing you could do was like supported by the choices you could make. And that narrative design element made growing up feel real, because you had all these choices in front of you, and then you had to pick one, and then at the end you were a 19-year-old looking back on your life being like, welp, which is a very like, no, people get that feeling. It's a very understandable feeling. So it's very nice to hear that it does feel like growing up, because that's what we're going for.
Yeah, and I have not had a chance to do the loop yet, but so far my experience has always been that it feels like like astoundingly internally consistent, if that makes sense. Like all the things that you're mentioning, where the any individual character's path through time seems to make sense. It does not feel necessarily like it doesn't feel like 800 separate events. It feels like a contiguous story that is sort of each section being sort of separated into these like month chunks, each of which have their own little story. And so to know that you are again being doubly vulnerable by allowing someone to go through again and have a chance to see those seams and sort of like have a chance to dissect things even further is cool. And I don't think that's something that is I'm interested to see how it works out.
There are some points in the game, There are some points in the game where you'd only get a little piece of lore if you failed a card event. And so those ones very likely are probably some of the less seen ones, where it's like you had to fail this event at this specific time in order to learn that your mom lost her leg doing this. And that's the secrets that are hidden in Exocolonist, where we really wanted to encourage people to play over and over, was like, you can explore every little bit. And that really felt there was sort of a crisis of empathy happening at the same time as I was writing. And there's a sort of understanding where it's like, yes, this person's an asshole, but if you had made the attempt to like talk to them earlier and maybe ask them about their relationship with their dad, maybe you would kind of understand where they're coming from. It's not to say that they got a redemption arc, but you knew what was going on there. And so having the chance as Soul to be this godlike creature who could understand and know everything was a very compelling power fantasy at the time.
Speaking of sort of optional content, I guess you'd say, is that I had a note that I wanted to ask you about. And that was that in Tunic, one of the things that the design tries to embrace is things being missable or doing things out of order. If something is critical path, then you sort of need to direct the player towards it to make sure that they experience it. And sometimes that can feel sort of antithetical to the idea of this sort of more designerless space where if you found something, you genuinely found it. And so it tries to very lightly author or lightly nudge at best. Exocolonist is like a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. I guess you've already talked about it, but I'm just fascinated to hear about how it is to make something that is not only coherent, but evocative and heart-wrenching and all the things that it is when not everyone is having that same experience. And it sounds like you've mentioned that you have key events and that are guaranteed to happen, lots of other events that can or can't happen depending on chance or how you perform in games, and just like a whole lot of flags and checks and stuff like that. Is that?
Yeah. There's a lot of if statements. There's a lot of hidden choices where it just simply wouldn't be visible to the player if they hadn't learned someone's deep dark secret beforehand.
Maybe outside of the scope of this conversation, but I have so many questions about just raw organization for that. Like, how is that kept in your head?
It's all
just
here.
In your head.
It was just a year and a half of not seeing anyone and only writing Exocolonist. It was just, that's what it was. People ask me, they're like, what did you use for doing that? And I'm like, I trained for this day. I wrote so much fanfic, and then they let me write a game, and that's what happened. So unfortunately, there are no shortcuts. There's no Notion databases or Google spreadsheets. I just thought really hard about the game for a year and a half.
I was picturing a massive corkboard.
Oh God, yeah, like the
Charlie Day.
Yeah, the Charlie Day. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I think something that's an interesting through line in both games is also that the world itself feels like it has a sense of agency. And so a lot of those hidden moments in Exo where you don't know why you don't get this scene. You don't even know that there is a scene to not get. And all of the hidden paths and little extra things that go on inside the world of Tunic, all of these lend a very deep agency to the worlds that people are playing in, which is, I think, something that's often missed in narrative games, in more narrative-driven games. Is that something that was was that a deliberate design goal, or is that something that just happened over the course of making massively complicated games?
And I very specifically wrote a world that you couldn't understand in one life, because I wanted it to feel very much like our own lives. We only have one. Soul has the benefit of many, and it was sort of like an empathy training exercise to do that in Exocolonist, basically being like, you may be the main character because you are pressing the buttons and you have magical wormhole energy that causes a time loop. However, you are not the main character in this other person's life. They are their own main character as well. And a lot of the character development was a lot of me being like, no, this person has a path, and you can't give them a shiny rock in year 13 during wet season and have them change their path forever. You can't fall in love with them, and through the magic of your love, they change their life goals. They are people, and you can choose to enter their lives and have an effect, but it doesn't change who they are. And that was an interesting reaction to get from players, especially a lot of people who came in kind of expecting it to be more of like a visual novel dating sim, where there were 10 dateable characters and there were 10 paths. And if you selected the right things and said the right words to this character, or were there at the right time to give them this gift, then you got their golden ending. And that's the gameplay experience that they wanted. And that was the gameplay experience that I didn't necessarily want to give in Exocolonist because there was this whole other story going on, and the gameplay element, the narrative element of I want to form a relationship with you and then we'll be together forever wasn't the thing that I wanted to do in Exocolonist. There are games that do that. It's a wonderful genre, but Exocolonist only just drew from very shallowly the look of them. And the characters themselves were their own main characters in their own stories. And people were a bit frustrated by this because they would fall in love with a character and they'd be like, we're going to be together forever. And I'd be like, okay, well, in the epilogue, that character dies at 30. I'm so sorry. And they'd be like, well, how can I save them? I'm like, well, you can't because, well, one, that's the way I wrote it. And two, that's who they are. Or that's what the world did to them. And there's only so many things you can do. And so writing a game that was sort of like fundamentally unfriendly to this idea that the player is the main character in everyone's story was something we were on purpose going for. And the sort of like obtuseness of the world and the fact that you can miss understanding certain things was a huge element of it.
There's at least two, maybe more overlaps there, I think, like overlap points that were, it seems like that's what this talk is finding like all the places where Tunic and Exo overlap. And one of them, I think, is a little bit the bait and switch, like using the visual language of one genre to do something a little bit different and bring people in. And I think the other larger one is, Tunic tries to do the same thing where it's like verisimilitude helping to promote this idea of feeling small and that the world is going on without you. Like it is a sort of a player ambivalent object. In the case of Tunic specifically, like it is a ruined world that you're exploring and, things happened in this place without you being there, and you're just a guy trying to explore and figure things out. You obviously play an active role as the player character in Exocolonist, but I got to the point where I realized, wait a second, these two people with whom I have heart meters are getting closer, and I was like, okay. These people very well may end up together, and it doesn't matter where my heart meter is with them, right? It's not going to end in smooching, for me at least, and that is just a sudden. I think the same feeling I got there is the same feeling that I would hope for when people play Tunic, is that they realize that suddenly they look at the world from a slightly different direction. It is no longer two-dimensional, it is now three-dimensional, and they realize, no, this isn't just a chart full of meters, or this isn't just, a hack and slash adventure. You are looking at it from a different angle and realize that there are connections happening beneath the surface that you didn't realize, that there's another sort of layer of secrets or interactions happening underneath.
And the fact that we were able to do that in two wildly different ways is really cool. Like, you did it by saying less, by saying almost nothing at all, and being like, you're little and small, and you have to, pick your way through this world. And I did it in the opposite direction by being like, here's everything about the world, and you can't possibly experience all of it. And so those two separate approaches are very cool. The fact that we were able to evoke the same emotion by doing the two different approaches was very neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We had talked a little bit about the emotions being brought up by I'm springboarding off of something you said, and it was you're this character picking through a ruined world in Tunic where everything happened without you, and the primal emotions that evoke of isolation and loneliness and fear and sort of just like minimizing the sense of self is such a cool design element, especially in video games where we're so used to playing the hero and having this power fantasy. And in Tunic, it's very much like in the ending that most people will get in Tunic, a bad thing happens to you and you lose your agency. which can be very frustrating for a player who's been like, but I played the game really good. And it comes down even to like what we call that. We call that the bad ending, which is a moral choice. And what makes that ending bad? It's an ending. It wraps up your story. Just because the player lost sort of agency doesn't make it necessarily the bad ending from a narrative standpoint. If it was a Korean movie, it would be like, great, that was a great movie, that was a great ending, because that's the way a lot of like storytelling happens in like audiences that are not necessarily this particular one that we're writing video games for. And so that sort of like, oh, that was the bad ending is an interesting sort of emotion to want to evoke. And I definitely like charged forward doing that a lot in Exocolonist as well, which is just like, I want you to feel like you are small and helpless. You are a child. You are innocent, and you don't know everything that's going on in this world. And that's on purpose the feeling I wanted to evoke, and not just when you're 10, but also when you're 19. And perhaps you actually have had a good ending. You've done the thing in the game that your family lives. Everyone lived. No one died. You saved their lives. The colony is fruitful, and you're gonna have a great future together. And that's a good ending. But still feeling like, yeah, but you're still a 19-year-old, still 20 at the end of the game, and you still have a whole life ahead of you. And like the people that you have 10 heart meters with, it doesn't matter that person will eventually marry this other person, or perhaps a tragedy will befall them later, or something like that. That's sort of the flow through the whole game of this feeling of like you're small and helpless. And I kind of wanted to talk about why we as narrative designers, why did we want to do that? And why did it resonate so well with the people that did truly love our games? Like, what did they get out of that? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, it's in the case of Tunic, the implication that you that you are just little in the sense of being a child is just implied. People often talk about having nostalgic feelings when they're playing it, when the game is trying to sort of sidestep nostalgia in a way. It's trying to, instead of saying, hey, remember how games used to look and sound, we made one of those. Tunic is trying to take feelings that often come from childhood and make something that tries to generate those as well, without necessarily sort of like going through the path that a lot of people took playing Zelda on their Nintendo or whatever. So early on in development, like before the game even started, really, I had this like list of like emotional payload line items that I really wanted to convey, and without realizing it, a lot of them were like that feeling that you might have when you are a kid and full of wonder, right? And you are excited about the potential of the world, and that turned into a list of like, well, how might that be evoked? And at no point does the game say, you are this old or anything like that, but people report feeling that way. And so I guess that's sort of like maybe Tunic's implicit, you are young and learning about the world, versus Exocolonist's explicit, you are young and you are learning about the world. But maybe in some ways doing the same sort of thing, like presenting, like one of the most exciting things about Exo to me is finding out sort of what's going to happen next, for all values of what that means. Is it who I'm going to be spending time with, what the next major plot beat is, or what is the nature of this world? Like there are lots of different threads and mysteries there that I'm excited to tug at. I don't know if that is relevant to the question that you asked at all, but do you agree with that at all, do you think?
Yeah, I loved what you said there about, particularly about drawing in people with nostalgia. I love this idea of like, remember when you were little and things were simpler. It was a better time and nothing bad was happening, which I think has some very strong social implications right now in 2023, where there's this sense of like when I was writing Exocolonist, I was implicitly linking it to things that were happening and explicitly linking it to things that had happened on Earth that were bad, which you can learn in the game and sort of like understand why. And I think the very interesting thing about sci-fi, particularly, and speculative fiction, is to take something that is happening in the real world and to blow it up so large that the audience can't ignore it anymore. And so they're primed through playing or reading or watching this sci-fi piece of media that when they see it again in real life, they can say, oh, it was just like The Expanse. It was just like Battlestar Galactica. This is just like in Star Wars. And I never make fun of someone for making that comparison. I know it's quite common to be like, read something more than Harry Potter or whatever, because people make those connections, but I think that's truly the power of fiction, is to be like, remember that thing you saw at 100% opacity in this video game? Now when you're seeing it in real life and you're just seeing it at 10% as yet another layer of this intensely complex world that we live in, you can identify it and see it and be like, okay, but when I saw it big, it was bad. So when I see it small, maybe I'll take action against it now. And so, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just, that is a wonderful analogy. I love that so much.
Thank you. So I think that what we did, I don't know if you did it on purpose, and I don't think I did it on purpose either, because I couldn't have imagined the political climate of 2023, but this sense of fighting back a little bit against the idea that things were better when you were little. You know, the 80s were perfect. Remember when video games were small and you were just a little guy? And then in Exocolonist, it's like, hey, remember when you were a kid and everything was fine? I think fighting back a little bit against that sort of like assumption of being like, actually, things are deeper and darker than you realize, and there are secrets that you couldn't possibly know, and so maybe work a little bit harder to understand your world is a really compelling thing to have come out of both video games, and I'm really proud to share sort of like this niche with you and to be on this panel with you and talk about that kind of stuff.
Likewise, for sure. Yeah, nostalgia is can be a very dangerous thing, like you said, and using it as a way to say, hey, let's take a look at this thing that we liked. And rather, instead of using nostalgia, taking something that you liked and realizing like why it was good, and trying to evoke the good parts of it without necessarily revering the circumstances that it came from, and sort of like rendering them down to a falsehood that is sort of like this perfected version of what we imagine it to be. I think it is valuable, but what is more valuable is probably using it as a critical lens, right? Like looking back, and whenever you feel that feeling of nostalgia, using that as a little alarm to say, wait a second, maybe I should be a lot more critical of what it is that is radiating this feeling for me.
For sure, for sure.
So we are just about at time. Is there any? Do either of you have any closing thoughts?
I have notes of cool things in Exocolonist.
You are truly in it right now. I'm honored.
But I feel like I'm going to be absolutely destroyed. This is, I guess, sort of like a sidebar. Really, but one of the things that I really like are these. We talked a little bit about like finding implicit meaning, or like that little moment of joy or elation that you get when you're like, oh wait, I get that. Ooh, it's not said out loud at all. And one of the things in EXO that I really like is the mechanical benefits of your friends' cards and what they say about their personalities. I think that's really, really lovely. What's the example that I have written down? Anemone's loyalty being like, oh, if you what is it? It's you have it brings all red cards to a certain minimum.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's wonderful and great, but at least in my playthrough, I had sort of fewer of those cards, and at a certain point, I'd outgrown that friendship, which is a heartbreaking thing. But that realization made me right. And oh yeah, important question: Tan or Tang?
So there's a couple hints to pronunciation in the game.
Okay.
People don't know how to know, Tangent's brother. They don't know how to pronounce that name either. And there's actually two jokes. So sidebar, Tangent has to be Tang because one of her nicknames when she was a kid is Tang-a-lang-a-ding-dong. So it has to be Tang.
I missed that. Okay, it's got to be Tang.
I know.
Okay.
It says all the things. And then her brother's name has to be pronounced Dis because otherwise the who dis joke doesn't work either.
Okay.
So
I love that. That's another example.
Pronunciation clues in the game. Yes.
Little secrets hidden in there.
However,
Similarly,
absolutely. If I very, very strongly believe that if you're a fandom person watching this panel right now, please tear apart my canon and nest in its remains. Please do whatever to make your fanfic work. It's totally fine.
yeah, fork this universe.
Yeah, absolutely. Tear it apart.
Other things that had that for me were how, I guess this is more like that sort of heartache tragedy, the slow burn of realizing that you, at least again in my playthrough, like there's a myriad ways that this could happen. The way that you spend your time sort of professionally, who you become as a person, what your career path's in, strongly influences who you spend time with and how your relationships form, which is so wonderful. Like there's a lot of implicit storytelling there, like, oh, here's a wonderful person with whom I am a childhood friend, but we're just different people, right? As much as I love spending time with them, I gotta learn, engineering or whatever. I really like that. What were some of the card ones that were particularly good? Like
I don't know if you would have gotten Tammy's card. Would you have gotten Tammy's card?
I did not get Tammy's.
You did not. Okay, that's okay. Tammy's card, when it happens, she boosts up the person to her left or right or something.
Right. Okay,
like a surprising amount. Like by the end, I think it's like a plus 10 to the card to her left kind of thing.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the tragedy of deciding to forget certain memories and just being like, no, I've moved on. This is less valuable to me. I don't need to remember that I giggled as a child. Right?
Yeah, it's growing up.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's wonderful. Dis being strongest when he is at the edges of society. Tang needing to be the very best. And like I'm playing it, and I'm like, no, you got to learn to work with other people. And then I move the cards around. I'm like, no, damn, you're right. You are best if I just let you be the best.
I didn't touch the card design. That was much more Sarah and Colin Northway. But what they did was incredible to see, sort of the narrative also being supported through the card game, which is a pretty cool thing to see. Like Exocolonist has like 3 different threads. There's like the life simulation aspect. There's the sort of like romancing, datables, 10 heart meter aspect. And then there's the card game aspect. The way they interact with each other and support each other is really interesting, and that's why it's so hard to be like, hey, I want to play another game like Exocon, and it's like, what part of it? Which part specifically? Do you want to play Growing Up, or do you want to play Citizen Sleeper? Or do you want to play Disco Elysium? Or do you want to play Secret of Mana? I don't know, whichever one. So it's hard because we threw a lot of stuff in together, and it was just through heart and grit that it managed to work. So it's very gratifying to know that the systems all work.
Yeah, no, it's tremendous. And I feel after the end of this that I have been barely spoiled at all. So I'm excited to get back to I Was
That's
a
exciting.
Teenage Exocolonist, available now.
And all of your favorite
Also, play
places.
Tunic, a double BAFTA winning Tunic.
Lindsay, do you have any parting thoughts?
Gosh, I said everything I needed to say about how much I love the nostalgia bait and switch, and how important that it is to sort of like look back and critically think on why your nostalgia feels good. And so just honestly more on that, I'm really excited to see where games go with this connection between our real lives and societal stuff. Like, you know, one of the things that happened one of the things that happens in times of social unrest is great art happens. Great suffering, great political art as well. It's very scary and vulnerable and like tiring sometimes to be at the forefront of social change, making media well in that change, well being affected by those systems, putting your whole game-ussy into something because that you feel a lot of heart in it. And so I'm just really excited to be working in games right now and writing 600,000 words of my hopes and dreams into something. So yeah, I'm really happy to see what's happening in games right now, and I can't wait to see more.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. It's been an amazing panel. I was excited going into this and having talked to you both. I can't wait to talk to you both more. Thank you so much. And that's everything. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.